Donald Trump is already claiming voter fraud in tomorrow's election, even though, as we know, we haven't even gotten to the actual election. Sure, there's been a hell of a lot of early voting. There's been voting by mail. There's been absentee ballots and all of that. And Trump says, of course, that stuff, the early stuff, is where all the fraud exists. In fact, he's even filed a lawsuit against Pennsylvania alleging that they are preventing Trump supporters from voting. He has gone on Truth Social multiple times and called for the prosecution of people in Pennsylvania, along with anybody who commits voter fraud, which prosecution of people who commit voter fraud is already something that happens. You should know, because most of it in the last 4 years has been against your very own supporters. But he is once again repeating what he did in 2020. But there's a difference this time. When he did that in 2020, it came kind of out of the blue. Okay? He had, of course, laid the stage for it ahead of the election. He had done it in 2016 to a degree, saying, oh, no, Hillary cheated. I actually got 5 million more than her, even though she got 3.5 million more than him. But what happened in 2020 was unprecedented, and it was something that nobody saw coming. But this time, we all know he's going to do it. So you've got people on the left that are ready for this. We have security at the Capitol already beefing up. Hell, they've already started boarding up windows for some stores in D.C. because they are preparing for Donald Trump supporters to claim the election was fraudulent and go out there and become violent. In fact, extremism experts here in the United States issued warnings late last week telling us that they do expect violence and they expect it to dwarf what happened in 2020. And that brings me back to the reason. When this all began in 2020, who was pushing it? Donald Trump. And then after Trump pushed it, he had his lawyers go out there and push it. And then after the fact, you had the conservative media take it up and push it out. This time, they're not waiting. According to a new analysis from the Washington Post, and they analyzed, 26 nationally prominent right-wing podcasters, from Joe Rogan to Dan Bongino to Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, and of course 22 others. And what they found is that all 26 of these right-wing talkers are already pushing baseless claims of election fraud in the election that takes place tomorrow. Now, none of them, of course, have any evidence to back any of this up, but they're saying it's totally gonna happen tomorrow, so that way, if Trump loses, they'll go and tell their audiences, see, we told you. He lost because they cheated. So we will be looking at more radicalized people than we were looking at in 2020, most likely, because the big lie started before the election and is being pushed by more people than it was initially in 2020. Here's what the Post said. Some of the hosts or their guests have echoed Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's claims that Democrats are preparing to steal the election. Experts say the baseless allegations could prime listeners not to accept the results if the former president loses the razor-tight race. During October appearances on the Shapiro and Rogan shows, Trump said that Democrats were cheating and that the media was interfering with the election. So to be fair, it's not always the host, but the host will bring on guests that then speak to the host's, audience of millions and tell them these lies. So those names I listed, it doesn't mean they specifically said it, but according to the Post, they have hosted people who have made these baseless claims. The Post continues. Podcast, whose fast-moving audio format has proved challenging for tech companies and researchers to monitor, can provide a safe space for those airing election fraud narratives, said Valerie Wirtschafter, a fellow at the Brookings Institution. The shows are an especially impactful vehicle for falsehoods and conspiracy theories because hosts foster intimate, trusted relationships with their listeners who regularly tune in during their commutes or while doing chores around their homes, she said. 4 years ago, Trump allies such as Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani used podcasts to put out claims of election fraud ahead of the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Wirtschafter said she worried the shows could provide a similar avenue again, saying, quote, "These aren't fringe voices at the end of the day anymore. It's a really prominent medium that should not be allowed to escape this conversation the way it did in 2020. The microphone is bigger, the audience is larger, and the trust is even deeper. Now, that's not to say that podcasts were not popular and, all over the place in 2020. They absolutely were. But they picked it up after the fact. They only had weeks to radicalize their audiences and sell them on this idea. Many of them have still been pushing that idea for the last 4 years, so their audiences are already primed. They're ready to reject whatever the election results are on Tuesday if they do not go their way. The other ones have, of course, picked it up in recent weeks. Oh, let's bring on this person. Let's cast doubt on this. Let's start a preemptive panic before we even have any evidence. And I think, to their credit, if you can give them credit for anything, a lot of these people aren't being as stupid about it as, say, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell were. Because Giuliani and Sidney Powell went out there, got themselves sued for defamation by bringing up conspiracy theories, creating conspiracy theories about Dominion and Smartmatic. So these hosts and the guests they're bringing on, they're not mentioning anybody specific, right? They're not doing it in a way that could get them sued or find them liable for any of this. And that's almost the worst part. They've learned. They're being smarter about it. They're not going to do anything that is going to cause them any kind of legal headache. Hosting these crackpots and nut jobs gets them an audience, absolutely. But it's not enough to find them liable for any violence in a court of law. It's not enough to get them sued for defamation if they're not mentioning anyone specifically or any company specifically. So they can push these things without worry. And we cannot do anything about it. We can refute it. We can provide real evidence. But that's it. We can't pull them off the air. We can't even call for them to be pulled off the air. They have their First Amendment rights the same as we do. We just have to be more ready for it. We have to be prepared to refute the lies. And it's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to feel redundant at times. But I am telling you right now, if Trump loses on Tuesday, and we hear more of this same old, oh, it was rigged, it was stolen, they're filing lawsuits, you're going to hear me every day talk about it. And you may get exhausted with it. You may not want to hear that every single day, but by God, that's my job. We have to call out this right-wing propaganda. We have to restore faith in the institutions. And more importantly, we have to convince enough people that it's a lie before we have another January 6th on our hands. That's my job. And I'm going to do it. And everybody else on the left is going to do it too. So don't get exhausted with it. Run with it. Tell everybody else about it. Share it. Make sure that we have debunked their lies before we end up with another, even more violent January 6th on our hands. Thanks for watching today, everybody. And don't forget, if you're not already, please do subscribe to this channel. We have fresh content going up every single day, and I would really hate for you to miss out on that. And speaking of missing out, if you're not following me across all other social media outlets, then get on it. You can follow the links in the description of this video.